Hello and welcome to Authors Unbound, a mini web series by the MyyTake group that seeks to connect authors to their intended readers. I am Arpit Agarwal, and our returning guest today is Dr. Mukund Rajan with his third book, Outlast: How ESG Can Benefit Your Business. Dr. Rajan, for those who do not know him, is chairman of ECube Investment Advisors, a unique platform that aims to power ESG improvements across industry. Previously, in a 23-year career, Dr. Rajan was brand custodian, chief ethics officer, and chairman of the Tata Global Sustainability Council. Welcome back, Dr. Rajan. Great to be speaking with you again.
Thank you so much, Arpit. Delighted to be back. And thank you for all you're doing to really shine a light on the importance of books and reading. And I think it's bringing reading back into fashion. I think these kinds of platforms really help to do that. So thank you so much.
Dr. Rajan, let me start by asking you, given that 42% of the graduate pool in India consists of women, why do you think industry struggles with gender diversity? We have one of the lowest levels of female participation in the workforce.
Quite right, Arpit. I think the statistics that I quoted in the book were based on some World Bank findings that suggested just over 22% representation of women compared to a global average of 48. And there's also statistics to suggest that if more women were working in the right way in the economy, your GDP could be substantially higher than it is. Today, instead of targeting a $5 trillion economy, you could be targeting a $6.5 trillion economy if you had the same number of women in the workforce the rest of the world manages to deploy. I think the issues in India, and you talked about specifically graduate women, which is a shame because these are well-educated people who have, for whatever reason, dropped out of the workforce. My sense is that there are a range of reasons that result in well-educated women not continuing in the workforce. There's been a lot of research to allude to many of the different factors that play a part in this. The most obvious, I think, that all of us are familiar with is stage of life responsibilities, looking after children, maternity leave, and sometimes looking after the elders as well. But I think the big reason why perhaps women do find it difficult is ultimately going back to something we need to recognize is true about our society and is true about a very male-dominated workplace, is essentially the power structure at work. I think men find it very easy, very comfortable dealing with a system where the rules are essentially defined by other men, where opportunities are created and possibilities open up more easily for men. In the book, we talk about the example of the tea plantation industry, where even to the extent of union participation, representing the rights of the workers in the plantation, women have been targeted and deliberately kept out of that power structure. So it's something that's not going to change in a hurry. And therefore, it's very, very important that the few women who make a breakthrough, who reach the top, who sort of break through the glass ceiling, become exceptional role models and do much more for other women to make it easier for them. So whether it is, bringing them back into the workplace after they've taken leave, whether it's creating the right environment for them to succeed, the kind of investments in training and experience building, ensuring that the gender pay gap, we've talked in the book about the fact that in India it's over 30%. So for the same work, women are getting typically paid less than men. So addressing many of these structural barriers to recovering your self-esteem and recovering your rightful place in the workplace, I think is very critical. They have to be much more open and inclusive.
True. Dr. Rajan, what are some of the other big issues that corporate India can champion under the S of ESG?
Well, a whole range of those. I mean, in our society as unequal as ours, beset by all the kinds of divisive issues that you see typically, from caste-based issues to religious issues and so on, I think there's just no end to the number of things that you could interest yourself in. But I think a couple are worth sort of calling out specifically beyond the issue of gender diversity that we just talked about. One big issue is the employment of members of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities. As you know, in the public sector and in government jobs, there is already affirmative action and reservation that happens for members of these communities. Around 15 years back, there was talk in the central government about legislation to enable this to happen even in the private sector. And there was a huge pushback from the private sector, which the government eventually conceded on. But the compensating commitment from the private sector was that they would do much more to be inclusive and invest in education, entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial development for members of these communities. I don't think enough has been done in the private sector. There's always going to be a risk that if members of these communities feel left out from commercial activity, from the power structures that exist today, there will be potential legislation in the future. And I think in their own interest, the private sector companies, businesses must pay much more attention to this agenda. The second is the treatment of contract labor in the manufacturing sector. Today, the situation in many companies is you have maybe 300 people in the permanent workforce and maybe 700 or 800 for contract labor. And so it's not even enough to run your capacity, the plant capacity to full. So it's very clear that people are now taking shelter under rules that are allowing this to happen, honestly, and taking on many more contract workers without the same benefits and privileges that the permanent workforce have. And it's creating a certain amount of short-termism in the way people can think about their careers, their trade, their skills, and so on. Again, I think this is creating a lot of labor-related tension in parts of India, which has festered, in some cases broken out into violence, attacks on managers. In an unequal society like India, I think these kinds of things cannot continue for much longer. And I think in their own best interest, forward-looking corporate managers and business leaders must pay more attention to these issues and ensure that they're doing the right thing for all stakeholders associated with them and not exploiting situations where people can feel aggrieved, feel unincluded, disenfranchised, and then essentially will rebel or fight back or wreak physical havoc on facilities of a company. So you want to avoid that.
Dr. Rajan, I'm switching gears and moving from S to G. On page 59, you say, because of the critical importance of good governance and a surfeit of cases illustrating poor corporate governance in India, the G of ESG is an area where media interest and public consciousness have been ignited. Dr. Rajan, would you agree that G, or the governance part, is the toughest to get right, isn't it? I mean, that's where it all starts from. But if you can sort that, the rest will follow through, right?
Oh, I quite agree. And in fact, there is a G, not just of the G in ESG, but a G of E and a G of S as well. Because ultimately, in any business that's trying to implement an ESG strategy, it starts with where is the locus of governance? What is the kind of strategy that's been put in place to execute on the ambition that the organization has? And how do you create alignment between those at the top who have the managerial powers and everyone else who has to really help to execute on that agenda? And therefore, it all goes back to governance. And you have a governance of sustainability, you have a governance of social issues within the corporation, as you do, in fact, the whole focus on corporate governance itself. So that's the right place to look for when you're trying to assess whether a company or a business is likely to have an ESG strategy that will succeed. The first place you want to look for is what is the governance structure? How is the strategy likely to get executed in the future? Do I have confidence that this organization understands what is called for from it? And as a means for engaging with stakeholders on the basis of supervision oversight that takes place, that's very clearly defined and documented. So you're absolutely right. I think it starts with that. So often people will ask you, in an ESG score, which element of E, S, or G is most important, or how much weightage do people give to each of these elements? And while there is no specific science to this, you often hear people saying that governance is 70% of it. And broadly, if one had to sort of one was pushed to a wall and said, "Give me a number," I would probably go along with that surmise that governance is overwhelmingly the majority of the score. But it's governance not just in the strict sense of corporate governance, but governance also of the way you approach your strategy for dealing with environmental and social issues as well.
Your intention, that's where it all starts from.
Absolutely right. Correct.
That is about all we have time for today, I'm afraid. We will have to leave it there. But before we call it today, let me read out an excerpt from the book in the chapter on governance. This is on page 61. A cursory glance at the compensation of Indian corporate leaders in the blue chip Nifty 50 companies of NSE shows that they were paid, on average, 260.5 times their organization's median employee salary for the financial year 1819. The question of appropriate senior executive pay as a multiple of median employee pay is very relevant in the context of the rising inequality we are seeing in India and the implications it has for social stability. That is so insightful. Viewers, this book is on the stands. Grab a copy today. And Dr. Rajan, thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Arpit. Thank you for having me on your show. Thank you.
Viewers, if you have liked this video, do remember to share and subscribe as well. Thank you and goodbye.